Critical infrastructure enables prosperity for all, isn't it? We all rely on it in modern world. Electricity, the internet, telecommunications, access to fresh water. They operate your household, my household, your business, and many other thousands of businesses. And without it, what do we have?
We all relied on bringing the data out of a system, put it into a spreadsheet, do a lot of calculation, the spreadsheet get corrupted, do it again and again and again. And that was our life, basically.
And the issue with a lot of critical infrastructure is that these are extremely long life assets, right? And we're getting in a period where we've got quite a lot of aging assets. For example, the water infrastructure is not in a very good state. A couple of years ago, the figure was around about $185 billion needs to be invested over the next 10 years or so to revitalize it and to modernize the infrastructure, right? So it is a platform that is built by people from the industry for the people that's in the industry to address the specific challenges that we all come through, from the field operations all the way through to senior leadership.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I'm joined by Kenny and Manu. Hey guys, why don't you give us the TLDR on, what you're doing and what you do on a day-to-day basis and what you're building?
Yeah, great. Hey, Charlie, thanks for having us on this podcast today. It's our first one of many, we hope. I'm Kenny, and this is my co-founder, Manu, and we formed Gems Innovation. What we're currently doing is so we've built a asset management platform for the next generation of platforms for the modern electricity network, and trying to provide a solution for the current challenges that we all have within the industry as engineers, analysts, managers, general managers, and field operators. In which case, in the sense that there's a lot of data that's flowing around, but there's not a way that we can aggregate all of that data to make decisions for how the modern network is going to look like, or where we need to put the investments, especially for a lot of the distributed energy resources that's flooding the market and of the data centers that we're putting up.
Right. Yeah, cool. So you're building software that helps manage power usage.
More so like aggregate data. So it's more so an asset management platform. So it's how you look after the assets, critical infrastructure assets from cradle to grave approach.
Okay.
So you can think of it as when to invest, how to invest, why do we need to invest, what is worried. So all those things.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and how did you guys come across kind of starting to build this? Like, what was the aha moments, the catalysts along the way that kind of led to it?
I can get this one. And so, first of all, I'm Manny, CTO of Gems. And so a few years back, maybe about 2 or 3 years back, Kenny and I worked together in the same company. That's where we met. And both of us were kind of afflicted by a problem that there weren't a very nice to use tool for electricity distribution to use that allowed us to make good decisions. We all relied on bringing the data out of a system, put it into a spreadsheet, do a lot of calculation, the spreadsheet get corrupted, do it again and again and again. And that was our life, basically. After a year or so, maybe 18 months, decided that I wanted to solve this problem and make a different web platform for people that actually use the system from day to day, and it's made for utilities. And decided to partner up with Kenny, who provides the more engineering side of the platform. And that's where it brought us together, and that's how we started.
And how long have you been working on it now?
At the moment, it's just about a year that the implementation started working. It's been over 2.5 years where we started, I started the structure of how everything put together, the designs and how everything is going to work. But the physical implementation started almost a year ago.
So a long time in the making, and now you've been dedicated to it for the last year.
Yeah, it's more so refining it and collecting more information, talking with other industry experts, professionals who have helped us co-develop certain features within our particular platform. So it is a platform that is built by people from the industry for the people that's in the industry, specifically in the industry, to address the specific challenges that we all come through, from the field operations all the way through to senior leadership. And it's more about how do we get oversight over the asset management activities that we typically perform within the organization, right? In terms of that, it's trying to make sure that we understand the decisions that we make a valuable and contributable impact to the community. Because from an electricity distribution point of view, it's more about how do you build a network or sustain a network that is much more resilient, that is reliable, that is safe, right, for the community in which it serves, and how do you provide a equitable cost of service at effect for the community which uses this, yourself and myself, right? Of course, we care about sustainability, but with the way that we're driving towards electrification, it presents quite a lot of challenges for the network itself. And then it's more about, we've got this much amount of data, right? But we are also going from system 1 to system 2 to system 3, downloading all that information to Excel, to do all the calculations, to do all the analysis that we really need to make a report that gets passed up the chain into addressing a particular problem, right? And this takes quite a lot of time. So we thought maybe there's a better way to do it using technology. We're always inundated with quite a number of data from different operational technology systems or IT systems. And a lot of the times with these particular problems is that they don't naturally talk to one another or share information to one another, which makes Manu's job really difficult and my job as an engineer really difficult, specifically if you're doing maintenance, or you're doing planning or forecasting, or you're trying to ensure that you've got oversight over your governance activities or project management for that matter.
Yeah, interesting. And what would you guys say is if your perfect customer walked in today, just as your ideal user persona, what would that look like, or what do you believe that looks like currently?
So our ideal user profile is a critical infrastructure owner that is small to medium enterprise. That's where we target, because there's quite a lot of barriers and a lot of things that we need to go through to target the larger incumbents, and that's fine. We're okay with that. That manage critical assets that have got a lot of people in positions and functions of different demographics, different age profiles, different backgrounds. Some of them are engineers, some are analysts, all doing a common thing in their own function to provide a value of service for the community, like, for example, water and electricity, right? So that'd be our ideal customer profile.
So it'd be a local water or electricity provider?
Yeah, critical infrastructure asset owners.
Yeah, as well as someone who wants to actually work a bit smarter rather than do things manually, just using the tools and use their brains to actually add value to the company with their actual job, not just to play with spreadsheet, but to design the infrastructure and the maintenance necessary for the community.
Right. So it would basically be an opportunity to provide superior margins and more accurate understanding of what's going on for a kind of mid-tier critical infrastructure provider.
To give you an example, it might be that there's requires some maintenance for water infrastructure, like the piping, the pump stations and the sewerage and etc. And what we do is collecting all the data. We can predictably and accurately find where and how this infrastructure need to be maintained and what's the maximum capacity and all the things that relate to it. So then the council would be proactively maintaining those infrastructure, diminishing the failure and reactive work, and just spend the right amount of money for the maintenance and the construction of new projects.
Yeah, so that's from the operations perspective, but it's also from the start of it, which is the planning aspect, right? Why do we need to replace? Why do we need to invest? What does the growth look like? What does that profile look like? And that takes quite a lot of data. And the issue with a lot of critical infrastructure is that these are extremely long life assets, right? And we're getting in a period where we've got quite a lot of aging assets. Yeah, right. For example, the water infrastructure is not in a very good state. I think that a couple of years ago, the figure was around about $185 billion needs to be invested over the next 10 years or so to revitalize it and to modernize that infrastructure, right? I don't know how accurate that is. Then there are other reports from Jeff Cooper, who is the CEO of the Infrastructure New Zealand, who's been quite active in this particular area and saying, look, he's been around the country, talked to a few of the asset managers and whatnot. And there seems to be an issue with understanding the health and condition of our particular assets, which really, when you think about it, is that really perturbs the the understanding about where we should make those adequate investments, right? And because it's a highly regulated industry, and because of the lack of competition, it's also you can't make as much revenue as you can because it has an impact on the rates in which we all pay. So there needs to be a fine balance between the propensity to invest and as well as keeping it fair and equitable for the community, right? And that's a really, really hard task to do, specifically if you don't have that data available, or you have the data available, but you spend quite a lot of time through the functions to get all of that data, to make an assessment, right? And then to make a report that gets passed up the chain, right? That leads to specific optimization, continuous improvement, or investment decisions. And that's pretty difficult to do for a company, right? And especially as we move towards modernization, especially if we move through a lot of disruption that's happening with technology or distributed energy resources, then it becomes, how much data do we need? Are we making the right decision? How do we accelerate, innovate? How do we accelerate sustainable energy resources, right?
Okay, yeah, for sure. And what does that look like from a business and a getting started perspective? Like, actually, let's go to that in a minute. I guess, did you both know as engineers and people working in critical infrastructure, there's great career paths there. Did you guys both anticipate that you would want to get into this and be kind of business owners? Were you business owners before? What's the kind of origin there?
For me, no, I didn't anticipate it. I've always been a corporate person. Operational management since around 20 years or so, but I changed my mind where I could not find a tool that actually could do the job that I needed to do.
Right.
For myself, not really. I didn't imagine it would pan out like this. I had a good career, and everything I built was to go from field operations through to management and then into senior leadership at some stage. Then this little thing came along, and it was just started off as we're actually trying to do reliability. We're actually trying to understand where to invest, how to invest, why, and optimize the strategy so we get the best reliability for the cost benefit, right? And to make sure that we are maintaining correctly and building the right sort of infrastructure. And the tools that we were using at the time didn't really make sense because it meant that I had to spend quite a lot of my time just to look at data, pull through an amount of data, working in Excel spreadsheets that I would pass on to my colleagues as well. And they would question me as like, what's this formula? Or what does this do? Where did you get this information from? And I just thought that, maybe there's a better way with today's technology and how can we do it better? And I discussed this idea with Manu, and we quickly discovered that, hey, this could be done, right? So we started experimenting different modules, putting data in, got our first foundation customer, worked with their data, received their inputs, and very quickly we had our work management module up and running and our asset information module up and running, which we demoed. And then one thing led to the next, and we thought, look, let's pitch this idea through to the Ministry of, Founder Catalyst Program, Ministry of Awesome, who we're very fortunate to be members of, and see if we can commercialize this.
Cool, awesome. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Is the team just you guys at the moment? Is it you two? Have you brought on any externals? What's the kind of makake of the team?
Oh, mate, it's just both of us with sweat equity.
Nice.
And whatever, savings that we have that we've poured into it. That's pretty much us in the game and foregoing opportunities and whatnot. Just because as a founder yourself and as an entrepreneur yourself, you know that there is this innate passion that just keeps on pulling, that's driving you, and you just can't explain it, but it feels to be the right direction.
We also have another 3 people that from time to time help us as volunteers just for additional things when they can, really.
So a few advisor type people in the organization giving feedback, contributing where they can, etc.
Yeah, so we've touched base with at least about probably 60 industry professionals throughout. People that we've showed it to, we've always received quite positive feedback, and we're at the point now where, as most startups go, is landing the first customer, right? And reaching out through to investors to get some interest in our company, because this could be the next biggest thing. We're not saying that we're not all about the unicorn craze. That's just a term to term a company or whatever. We don't know, right? Mm-hmm. But we know that we understand the industry. We know the troubles that that we face and other functions face, from regulatory through to general management, through to project management, asset management, maintenance, field of operation, GIS, IT as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's one of those interesting businesses or business opportunities where you don't need tons of clients, but you obviously need to work out a killer way of closing sales and then also then delivering the implementations, where I'd say there's generally in these types of businesses, there's a moderate high risk of execution risk. But And that obviously creates a moat. And I guess, if you look at the best example of it, which I would then, if you were to say, be more, I guess industry agnostic, you'd probably say Palantir have probably been the best in the world at kind of this sort of product offering where you have a decent amount of implementation, a lot of complexity and a high execution risk. And they've obviously become a very, very large business. Obviously it's different because of what they're doing versus what you're doing. But if you kind of take it back to first principles, like there's quite a lot of crossover in how they successfully execute. And, we talk about sales, or I talked about sales as one of the bigger risks is they don't have sales, but they still get sales. So it'll be really interesting to think about how you guys strategize that whole distribution piece, and how do you get clear wins, and how do you start to, get to a point where you can basically use that revenue or use those initial customers to continue to boost the business and give you guys some income, right?
Yeah, this is a topic area that we discuss with our mentor quite regularly. In fact, just half an hour, probably about an hour before this, we were engaged in a one-on-one session, and this was the exact thing that we were talking about. And last week we were talking about what channels are we using, how are we creating awareness, how are we creating our reputation and whatnot. And unfortunately in our industry, seeing is believing. You can sing the gospel as much as you want, but people want proof, right? Proof's in the pudding. A lot of the differentiation comes from understanding customer needs and customer wants. And you talked about implementation costs. Yes, implementation is a risk. Fortunately for us, we're from the industry. We do understand the processes and the unique aspects of it, and that's that leads to an easier time to migrate the data across, implement the data across, understanding the different functional needs and wants of the individual, of the objectives that a function needs to produce, and also making that relationship between, well, function A needs this, but function B also needs this, right? So here's a processing bit, and what are the output bits to enable a function to do a specific thing that they need, whether this be a centralized data for demand forecasting or planning perspective that's going to happen in 5 or 10 years with the step changes that are currently happening, right? Or what does a regulatory change looks like for the business over the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, and so on and so forth, right? How do we prove that we've got regulatory oversight? Is our governance model working? We've made a strategic change, right? How do we know that's working? So things like that.
For sure. And what would you say success looks like? If we were to just dream for a moment, we go look forward 5 years in the future, like what would success look like in that perspective?
For who?
For you guys, personally and as a business.
Yeah, I would say that we have possibly about 40 to 50% of the available customer in New Zealand, and expanding into Australia and possibly into the Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and start thinking about the expansion in the US.
So that'd be from probably a business expansion and growth perspective. But if we're talking about what success looks like, I mean, if it's talking about revenue, then every business wants to make more money, so then they can invest that money into hiring more talent and to enable more modules to actually make certain things a reality, right? Create opportunities, pretty much. Then if you're talking about business-wise, it's more about growth, more about reputation, right? So of course, we want a very good reputation, as in this is the actual next generation platform for the modern utility network.
Right.
More about the social reputation, as in our user base and the community in which we serve, saying, this is a product that we've been looking for, this product that we actually really want. We help co-develop this. Now it's in a case where our job, 70% of our time, is not digging through server structures or paper archives or asking Manu or asking Kenny what the information is. We're spending more of our time analyzing problems, diagnosing them, advising on the best strategic directions or investments to make, and so on and so forth, right? So we instead ahead of the ball rather than behind the ball.
Okay, that makes total sense. And I guess, like, as founders, bootstrapping so far, but potentially looking at how you obviously grow and, potentially get funding, etc., whether that be funding through a critical, an early adopter or equity through investment. What would you say now, being in it for from a year with, relatively corporate backgrounds, right? Experiencing the kind of the life of building and bootstrapping. Like, what would you say you guys' biggest lesson has been in the first year, do you think?
So I think the biggest thing is probably to get the foundational customer involved a bit earlier stage into the design. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have a foundational customer, and when I was designing the software, I didn't know Caddie as well. So there was a bit of factual thing, but if I could change that, involved into the initial architecture and design customers, it would have been a bit easier.
That was actually to turn your world upside down. Mind you, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
that's classic builder dynamic. When you have something in your head of what you see the future to be, and then you obviously marry that to real clients and customers, right? I think what's really interesting is, especially in this day and age where, the barrier to getting or feeling like you can get a product to market feels much lower these days. The barrier to entry does feel lower, feels more achievable with less capital. But that you can't compress the time it takes to iterate through real customer feedback, and to nurture and develop a product takes a long time of people actually using it. And I think that lesson is a good lesson to bring up, because I think that you're totally right, and I've totally been guilty of it a few times in my career too. So yeah, definitely second that one. What about you, Kenny?
I come from the opposite side, where I've taken teams through change from an operational perspective and change mindsets and whatnot. And I see certain parallels, so it goes on board. Then I did some consulting myself, and I was observing the same things, the same repetitive things, incumbent systems, legacy systems,
right?
Not really using the systems for what it was, more so because it's extremely like SAP is extremely complicated. You ask anybody,
right.
They'll tell you the same thing. I enjoyed using it. Maybe I'm a special case. I don't know. That doesn't mean that it was the perfect platform by any means or stretch.
Yeah.
It was just that for myself personally, it was more the curiosity about how do I use it better? How can I better use it to accomplish the things that I need to do, right? And that was the same with other platforms such as Technology One, IBM Maximo, JD Edwards as well. So, and it was the same repetitive pattern. So then when I met Manu, I found out that he had developed something and he showed it to me, and I went, no, this is how it actually works. And he went, crap. And I said, yes. Then we went through a whole discovery session with customers. So it was just myself, my experience through, and we needed to quantitatively prove our assumptions. And we went out to the market and we started validating and verifying them. And this was one of the requirements as part of the Founder Catalyst program with Ministry of Awesome, which we received quite a lot of resources, a lot of mentoring, coaching, and advisory, and started down this path. The biggest lesson probably from there for me was, how do you market? How do you sell, right? And I needed to actually come out of my shell, because I don't like talking to people. And it took courage for me to accept this invitation to go into a podcast, knowing very well that it's probably going to be aired everywhere, right?
On all the platforms, but not everyone will see it, don't worry.
That's the problem, you see. Not everyone will see it, but some people will see it, right? And it takes quite a lot of courage for me to be able to do this. And I had a lot of inward reflections myself. And it wasn't until recently that I thought, I've got something to say. And it took me quite a while to get to that point, because I've been posting on LinkedIn, and it took me a while as well. But what I found was, what I put on LinkedIn, and I've asked my colleagues, I've asked my networks, I say, hey, is this relevant? Is this what people really want? And what I was putting out there started to resonate with people, whether it created impressions or I get a external feedback saying, hey, what you put was really cool. Can we know more about this? Right. So then I thought, maybe I do know what I'm talking about. Right. And I'm not one to lean into imposter syndrome. I don't actually really believe in that all too much. But there is a case where you do have to assume that, let's say that you are the CEO, the founder of, or the co-founder or the CTO of the next generation asset management platform, right? How do you make it reality? How do you tell people about it? If you stay silent, then people never hear about you, right? So I had to really come out of my shell. And for me personally, that was the biggest growth, and facing my fears and getting over that hump.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that, there's a little bit of yin and yang going on in the dynamic relationship of how you guys have built the team between the two of you? And, Manu, you're kind of discovering around, okay, how do I make sure that my ideas are aligned with the clients, and that's going to integrate. And then for you, Kenny, it's been, okay, how do I actually feel comfortable enough to communicate what I have to say out in the world?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of building a platform is more about, and especially as a CTO, as a CEO or an executive of that particular sort, is for every founder is you are the salesperson, you are the marketing person, you're the person that everybody sees that people want to talk to, right? You're the person that's going to lead from a startup to an emerging business, right? And you need to build that credibility, you need to build that reputation, you need to build the trust. But if you're not out there speaking with people or hearing the concerns, what the pain points are, then you're just invisible, right? And that's no way to really build a company, is it?
Totally. Yeah, no, that's really great learning. And I think that's also great self-awareness, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to actually work on evaluating what's really going on, and we can get really great feedback from potential clients. But while they're potential clients, they're not, they're still not in the circle, right? And there's a lot of noise out there. And obviously you're trying to work out what's the signal. There's so much noise out there in the world, especially this day and age. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to use, kind of system 2 thinking to work out what incremental steps you can make to keep going. And I think for you guys, it's definitely like trying to break down, because of your type of business, you've kind of got to have you've got to solve quite big problems. Like eccuity, for example, getting an incremental client on our consumer side is very different to you getting an incremental client, right? So it's how do you break up these big, seemingly large tasks that feel intimidating into small bites of an apple? And I think you guys can do that, by just staying aligned and really keeping each other accountable for that focus, of like what little bit of progress can we make today? What 2 steps forward can we get?
Yeah, I think you're pretty much spot on. And something really cool that Kenny and I have with this one is we are totally different personalities and how do we work and etc. Where Kenny's got, people that, too many people watching him, etc. That's not my problem at all. I'm more the extrovert of the side and etc. I use technology and all the rest, and Kenny is a very great engineer with all the numbers and the structure and etc. And because we have these 2 different approaches on everything, where I do, for instance, an implementation if I say through Kenny, and Kenny look at through the engineering point of view and the very calculated methodology, and he explains it to me, and then I go and explain it. Yes, but a user will never do that because they don't think this way. And also fundamentally to realize that the both of us, we are a power user. We used and push the previous application to the limit and more, where most of the users don't. So whatever we do, and it's to be simplified down 20 levels so everybody can use it confidently and be intuitive for that. But I think these kind of different point of views, it helped out a lot to make a very great application.
Can I circle back to a comment that you made before about the barrier to entry? And you tied 2 things together within this particular conversation, which was, one of it was that there is a lower barrier to entry where it's very easy to make these sort of things, right? But on the flip side, you also said that it's quite a challenge because there's so much noise out there at the same time. And it's difficult for a decision maker's perspective to understand and know what is actually beneficial and what is not, right? From our perspective, we see that the barriers to entry are definitely a lot higher because of the amount of noise and micro applications that are currently out there in the particular market, right?
Yeah.
And we have to fight much more harder to say, hey, we understand your pain points. We're from the industry. We know how to migrate your data across. These are things that you need to be aware of, right? And when you come with us, it's not just hi, thank you very much, see you later. We work with you from start to the finish, and as well as after sales, to make sure that it is providing value, it is actually providing benefit for you, and that you're doing the things that you really need to do that works towards the objectives and the strategies that you put down. At the end of the day, that's what it is, right?
At the end of the day, it's, in any game where you're trying to get a new tool into an organization, it's about typically having a champion within the organization and giving them the easiest pathway to value possible and to demonstrate that it's working. And that's something where there's a lot of noise because you are seeing so much go on in the market now, especially in like you say, between kind of full suite services to micro applications, becomes very unwieldy. And you guys can do that through, really focusing on how do you add value and build confidence and trust through content.
Correct.
where you're demonstrating the problem being solved, and, building out that framework's really important. And then it's about, building really strong relationships. At the end of the day, that's where business is kind of tending towards, and you're in the benefit of not needing 1,000 clients. So it's about really being focused and then lateralizing your revenues once they're embedded, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to throw the kitchen sink at them. It's about getting that yes and then allowing those bites of the apple to happen, right?
Yeah. And it's also, from community perspective, it's critical infrastructure enables prosperity for all, isn't it? We all rely on it in modern world. Electricity, the internet, telecommunications, access to fresh water. They operate like what? Your household, my household, your business, and many other thousands of businesses. And without it, what do we have?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely very important. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, guys. I've really appreciated your time, and it's great to learn about a new product business that's being built in New Zealand in, like you say, such a critical area. And I wish you all the very best, and I hope to stay in touch and continue to follow your journey.
Thanks, Charlie, for reaching out. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
It's been an experience. Thank you for me.
Awesome. No problem. Cheers, guys. Much appreciated.